The walls of stone could not protect them, nor could crowns, nor crosses. When the sickness came, it spared no one. Welcome to Medieval Grimspire Chronicles, where history's darkest fevers still burn. A soft wind stirs the alleyway as dawn stains the stone walls in shades of ash and rose. Somewhere, a door creaks on rusted hinges. Somewhere, a woman weeps through a shutter, pressing her palms to the wood as if it might save her. But below, in the heart of the dying city, Matteo walks, one foot dragging behind the other, his cartwheels groaning under their burden. The streets of Florence, once gilded in laughter and lute song, now reek of vinegar, death, and ash. In the corners where children once chased ribbons, rats feast in silence. In the windows, once bright with embroidered curtains, only waxy faces stare out hollow, watching, waiting for the end. And in the mouth of the alley, barely more than a shadow in the early light, a boy of 12 tugs a cart of corpses toward the edge of the world. The mask he wears is a bird's face, grotesque, beaked, stuffed with rosemary and crushed oranges. It presses against his skin like a second face, and though it hides the stench, it cannot hide the fear. Beneath the leather, Matteo's breath is shallow. He counts each inhale like a prayer. In, hold, out, hold, in, hold, out. His master, old Ronaldo, walks ahead, a silent shape with heavy gloves and red-stained boots, grunting when the cart jolts too hard over the stones. Matteo never speaks to him. He doesn't need to. There are only two tasks now: carry the dead and bury them. Names are for the living. They pass the butcher's stall. It's empty now, flies swarming the meat hooks where once hung lamb, pig, oxen. Matteo remembers the butcher's son, Carlo, who used to toss him scraps. He remembers his laugh, high and crooked. He remembers the way Carlo diets wide, mouth foaming, collapsed in the gutter beside a heap of bread. A week later, his father joined him in the pit beyond the city wall, where olive groves once stretched in sweet lines. The ground has opened its jaw. A trench as long as a street and deep as a well, carved into the clay. The first time Matteo saw it, he thought it was a wound in the world. He sees it for what it is, a hungry god, one that demands offering. They stack the bodies in layers, first lime, then flesh, then lime again. The lime sizzles on the skin. It hisses like boiling oil, smokes like kindling. Matteo tries not to look at their faces, but sometimes he must. Sometimes the limbs are tangled, and he must untwist them, pull a frozen hand from a mouth, must close a woman's gown to preserve her. He tells himself it is duty, that this matters, that someone must. And then came the day he saw her, Lucia. She lay half covered by a shroud, curls spilled like dark silk across her collarbone, her red shoes still tied, her mouth still parted in surprise. Once, she had danced barefoot at the fountain, coin tucked in her teeth, singing about lemons and saints. Matteo had watched her then from behind the baker's stall, heart thudding. How he cannot look away. Her fingers are curled inward, like she still holds something, perhaps a song, perhaps a secret, perhaps a name. His hands tremble as he reaches to cover her, and when he pulls the shroud over her eyes, something inside him splits. That night, he boils water and scours his skin until it peels. He scrubs until his knuckles bleed, but still her face lingers behind his lids, behind the bird mask, behind the veil of lime and smoke. The bells of San Marco toll without rhythm now. Once they rang for prayer, for weddings, for feast days. Now they toll for death, or perhaps out of habit. Or perhaps the monks have gone mad, bringing them against the dark like a child banging pots against nightmares. Inside kitchens, mothers pierce their children's boils with red-hot nails. They burn incense. They burn herbs. They burn anything that smells alive. In the alleys, men drink until their livers burst. In the cloisters, priests scream Latin backwards. And beneath it all, Matteo walks dot. Each day, he drags the cart. He doesn't count the bodies anymore, but he remembers their eyes, their shoes, their rings, a braid, a ribbon, a crooked tooth. Their names float through his sleep, gentle, breathless, forgiving. Matteo, they say, come, hold us. Hey, wakes, sweating. The mask beside him on the floor, its beak pointing toward the ceiling like a question that cannot be answered. He dreams of rivers made of bones, of birds made of skin, of doors that will not open. He dreams of Lucia's hands, still curled, still holding. He dreams of silence, the kind that screams. One morning, as frost traces the windows, Ronaldo does not rise. Skin is gray, his lips blue. The fire has gone out. Matteo waits, kneeling at the hearth, places the mask gently beside the old man's head. And when the light begins to filter through the shutters, he lifts the gloves from their hook. They are too big. They smell of salt and leather. He puts them on. The cart is heavier now. Alone, it drags slower. The wheels stick in the mud where blood has mixed with rain. But Matteo does not stop, does not turn back. Florence burns. Behind him, not with fire, but with forgetting. The streets no longer echo with song. The tapestries hang damp with mildew. But in the pit, the earth remembers. It takes, it keeps. It waits at the edge of the trench. Matteo pauses. He closes his eyes. The breeze carries a faint smell of rosemary and something else sweet, almost citrus. He opens the sack. He pours the lime. He lays the bodies down. And then he stands there, still as stone, listening, not for voices, not for ghosts, but for bones. They whisper now, soft, slow, like breath on marble. And Matteo, child of ash, apprentice of silence, closes his eyes and listens. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolls, and somewhere in a convent to the north, a candle gutters in its socket as the flame prepares to leap. A crow cries once, then again, its wings slash in the morning mist as it circles above a convent garden, deep in Saxony. Beneath its black spiral, a woman kneels among the brambles, pruning thorned vines that snake up a crumbling wall. Her hands are bare. Her fingers bleed freely, and yet she does not stop. Sister Agnes does not fear pain. The bell of prime has not yet rung. The cold has already stiffened her joints. Breath escapes in wisps, her habit damp with dew and sweat, and on her ankle beneath wool and rund linen, a ring of red has begun to bloom like spilled wine soaking into cloth. She noticed it 3 days ago, a heat beneath the skin, pulsing like a heartbeat not her own. At first, she thought it penance. Perhaps she had spoken too harshly to the novice. Perhaps she had not wept enough at matins. But now, it burns, even the hem of her robe grazing. Her flesh feels like fire. The sisters avert their eyes as she limps past. The abbess says nothing, but her silence is heavy. Waiting in the cloister, the icons of saints stare down from peeling plaster, golden eyes, indifferent. Saint Anthony, protector of the sick, seems to look away. Agnes lights a candle anyway, not for healing, but to remind herself that once warmth did not mean torment. The disease has no name that the sisters will speak aloud. The village below, they call it the holy fire, or worse, the devil's bread. It comes not from air or water, but from the grain itself. Rye, harvested too late, its stalks blackened with rot, baked into loaves, blessed, eaten, and then the madness begins. Last winter, the miller's son ran screaming through the churchyard, tearing at his skin until blood soaked the snow. They said he'd been touched by demons. They said his soul had burned away. They buried him at the edge of the forest where no prayers reach. His father vanished soon after. Now the village dares not bring offerings to the convent. Nuns barter what little they have with dried herbs and wax. The bread is made in silence, the grain carefully sifted, though all know it may already be cursed. In the refectory, Agnes eats little. She fingers her rosary beneath the table, each bead slick with oil from her palms. Her lips move in prayer, but her mind flickers elsewhere. To the garden, to the wind, to the way her skin has begun to itch from the inside. She has seen others stricken, the burning limbs, the convulsions, the screams. She remembers Sister Edith, who tore off her own veil before collapsing by the well. They whispered she had consorted with spirits, but Agnes knew the truth. The rot was in the bread. That night, as the wind howls through the cloister windows, Agnes dreams of wings. Not doves, but something darker. Claws scraping against the arches, feathers made of soot. She wakes, drenched, her sheets tangled, her ankle aflame. The wound has spread. Blackness seeps outward in threads, like veins filled with smoke. The abbess visits her in the infirmary. She says little, dips cloth in vinegar, lights incense that curls like serpents around the rafters. She does not call for the surgeon. There is no cure for this. Only prayer, only waiting. Outside the chamber, the younger sisters weep quietly. One leaves sprigs of lavender at the threshold. Another murmurs that Agnes once healed a sparrow with a broken wing, as if kindness might shield one from fire. The bell tolls once, then twice, not for prime or vespers, but for warning. In the village, fear has twisted into superstition. A child with a twisted leg is accused of bringing the curse. A goat is slaughtered in the square. The priest calls for fasting. Men scour the fields with salt and ash, but none will speak of the bread, of the way it fed their children, how it now devours them from within. Back in her cot, Agnes begins to hallucinate. The stone ceiling shifts like water. Her fingers tremble without command. She sees her mother's face, though she died years ago, leaning over her, humming an old lullaby about saints and doves. The room smells of burnt rosemary and mold. She cannot move her toes. The fire climbs her legs. The abbess returns with 2 novices. They strip the bed, bind her wrists with linen soaked in vinegar and wine. To draw the sickness out, they whisper. But Agnes feels only the linen stiffen with heat. Bowl of leeches is brought, their bellies already bloated. The novices avert their eyes. One begins to cry. The abbess tells her to leave. Agnes's vision blurs. The edges of the world curl like parchment near flame. She hears the crow again, distant, yet circling. They cut the skin at her ankle. A thin stream of black blood trickles out, steaming. The abbess recites Psalm 91, voice quivering. He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler, and from the noisome pestilence. ... But Agnes does not hear the rest. She is far away now, back in the garden, hands in the soil, feeling the heartbeat of the earth. The thorns do not cut her. The sun is warm. The fire is gone in the convent. The candle beside her cot gutters, then steadies. Later, they will bury her in the garden she tended, beneath the briar vines she shaped with bleeding hands. They will mark her grave with a simple stone. The village will forget her name, but the sisters will remember. The novices will speak of her when they light the lamps. And the abbess, older now, slower, will pause by the herbs each morning and breathe deeply. Far above, the crow will still circle, and far away, where another cart rolls through the filth-choked alleys of Florence, a boy listens to the silence of bones, unaware that in a convent to the north, another fire has gone out. Yet the air is not colder. The world does not mourn. It only waits for the next ring of red, for the next breath that burns. The sky over the highlands was the color of old pewter, heavy, cold, and cracked by wind. Mist curled around the heathered slopes like the breath of something long dead. And far below the ridgeline, a flock lay scattered and still. The sheep had stopped moving 2 days ago. Not all at once, but slowly, like a choir losing its voice, one by one. They stumbled, they shook, their mouths foamed, and eyes turned glassy, like marbles fogged by breath. Some screamed before falling, others simply collapsed where they stood, legs folded like kindling beneath them. Ulrich had tried to lift the smallest lamb. Its body was rigid, its breath came in rattling gasps. By dusk, it was gone. Now, the shepherd trudged through the mire, sack over his shoulder, boots sinking with each step. The sack held only wool, not meat, not coin, only the shaved remains of the ones he'd burned last night beneath the hanging rock, the ones whose bellies had burst open in the cold. Smoke still lingered in his cloak. He coughed and tasted iron. There was a smell in the valley now, something not of animals or wet earth, but of ruin. He had not smelled it before the miners came. They had dug the hill for silver, breaking into the old seams above the glen. The stream had gone cloudy since. No fish swam now. Children who drank from it clenched their bellies in pain. But no one had spoken against the Lord who leased the rights. Not when the coins flowed down the valley like melted snow. Not when salt pork was traded for candles and boots. But now the sheep were dying, and Ulrich's daughter, Brenna, had not risen from her bed in 3 days. The physician from Bremer had come, looked at her gums, blackened and bleeding, and muttered something about bad air and imbalance of humors. He had bled her at the wrist, then left with 2 coins and a crust of barley bread. The wound still leaked in her sleep died at night. The house was silent, but for her whimpers. His wife lit candles to St. Moden, soaked her hands in nettle and ash for penance, whispered prayers with trembling breath, but the girl only worsened. Ulrich watched the moors from the doorway, smoke curling from his lips. He had once known every ridge and bend of this land, each path worn smooth by hoof and boot, but now the hills seemed stranger, as if the very bones of the earth had shifted beneath the heather, as if the valley was no longer theirs. The villagers had begun to speak in low tones, about curses, about sin, about Ulrich's land sitting downstream from the mine. A boy threw stones at his door last Sabbath. Someone nailed a dead sparrow to his gate, and this morning, at the market, no one took his coin. The old woman, Bruna, blind and toothless, muttered that the earth was sick. Tate, it had been poisoned, and now spat its bitterness back through the sheep, the water, the bones of children. Ulrich had always dismissed her, but now, even the winds seemed to carry warning. He lit a lantern and walked out into the dusk, past the fence, up the rise. The ground grew soft as he neared the stream, swollen with melt and grit. In the water, white froth clung to the rocks like scabs. He dipped a finger into it and tasted bitter, metallic, wrong. He stood still for a long time, listening. Not for sounds, but for silence, the kind that follows truth. Behind him, in the distance, the roof of his cottage flickered orange with firelight. Inside, Brenna still lay unmoving, her lips cracked, her hair soaked with sweat. She held a small carved lamb in her hands, a gift from Ulrich last spring. She would not let it go. He returned at midnight. His wife sat in the corner, rocking slightly. The candle had burned low. The room smelled of bile and rosemary. We walked to Brenna's side and placed a cool cloth on her brow. Her eyes flickered open, just once. "Papa," she rasped. "It's so loud." He nodded, not understanding. "It's in the ground," she whispered. "It's angry." The words sent a chill through him, colder than the wind outside. The next morning, he found her still, her hand still clenched around the carved lamb, her lips parted slightly, as if surprised. He did not cry. He wrapped her in linen, laid her gently in the cart. His wife kissed her forehead, then turned to the fire and did not speak again. Ulrich walked alone down the valley road, past the chapel, past the stone circle, past the stream that no longer ran clear. The fog parted briefly, and he saw the mine. In the distance, its black mouth yawning, like a wound in the earth. He walked straight toward it, past the markers, past the warnings, past the men who shouted at him from behind wagons of ore. He dropped a sack of wool at the gate, then the linen bundle. Then he sat and waited. When the miners came near, he spoke softly, but each word was a stone. This land is dying, and you have salted the womb. They did not understand, or pretended not to. One laughed. Ulrich stood, without. Raising his voice, he said, she said, it was loud beneath the ground. That night, the wind howled through the glen like a scream trapped in rock. The village did not sleep. Okay, and though no fire was lit, a pillar of smoke was seen rising from the mouth of the mine at dawn. The sheep never returned, neither did Ulrich. But in the hills, Bruna says she hears footsteps, heavy, slow, measured, like a man walking upstream, and sometimes beneath the gurgle of poisoned water. The villagers hear a child's voice, whispering from the soil, calling to be held, calling to be remembered, calling, always, toward the silence that follows when the ground turns bitter, and the bones begin to speak. A torch guttered in the dark, its flame trembling against the wind that slipped through the broken glass of the infirmary windows. The scent of boiled rosemary, old blood, and candle wax hung thick in the stone vaults, as if the walls themselves had soaked in the fever and refused to forget it. Brother Aldrich moved like a ghost between the rows of straw beds. His robes were stiff with dried sweat. His hands, cracked and raw, carried a basin of vinegar laced with sage and salt. The mixture steamed faintly in the cold air, and with each breath, he whispered a psalm not to comfort, but to remember the shape of words in a world collapsing into silence. This was Ghent, in the year of the sweating sickness. It did not blister like plague. It did not boil the skin or blacken the limbs. Came fast, without warning, like a shadow leaping from the rafters. One moment a man was at his plow, or a girl baking bread, and the next he was drenched in sweat, seized by tremors, heart racing toward its own end. Within hours, they were gone. There was no cure, no saint who could stop it, no relic that warded it off. Only the washing, only the herbs, only the prayers said between screams. Aldrich paused beside a boy no older than 15. His skin shone slick and gray, eyes wide and unblinking, teeth chattering against each other like dice in a wooden cup. Aldrich dipped a cloth into the basin and laid it across the boy's forehead. His lips moved, reciting again the words he'd spoken 100 times that week. Domini, refugium factus, ease nobis, ... The boy didn't hear him. He stared upward as if watching something above the beams of star, or a shadow, or an angel descending slowly through the smoke. The bell of the monastery had stopped ringing 2 days ago. The bell ringer was dead. No one had removed the body. Yet, the novices no longer came to prayers. One had gone mad and locked herself in the sacristy. Another had drowned in the font, searching perhaps for cleansing or escape. Aldrich did not remember the last time he had slept. He remembered that sweating first came in the south, among the traders, the wool merchants. Then it moved into the abbeys, the courts, the bakeries. Even the bishop's niece, who wore veils embroidered with pearls, collapsed in the cathedral during Mass. She died with a psalm half spoken on her tongue, No rank had been spared, no purity protected. Outside, the wind howled down the narrow alleys, carrying with it the scent of something burning. Not wood, not coal, but flesh. Whole households had been set alight, the dead too many to bury, their bodies too swollen with sweat to leave unattended. The pyres smoked day and night. The air was thick with it. Birds no longer flew over the city. Inside the infirmary, Aldrich moved to the next bed. A woman clawed at her shift, her chest heaving, lips mouthing silent prayers or curses. Her fingers curled as if gripping a memory she could not release. Aldrich gently held her hand, whispering words he did not feel. "You are not alone." She turned her head slightly, eyes locking onto his with a clarity that made him shudder. "I saw them," she rasped. "They wait at the door." "Who waits?" he asked, but she was gone before the question finished forming. He closed her eyes, placed a wilted daisy on her chest, and moved on. In the chapel, wax dripped from the altar, like tears. No one dared touch the relics anymore. Even the gilded cross had begun to tarnish. It gleamed less each day, as if heaven itself had turned its gaze. Aldrich sometimes thought he could feel it too. Not absence, but something worse, abandonment. On the fourth night, he collapsed beside the well, shoulders shaking. He dipped his hands into the cold water and let it numb the burn of his wrists. He looked up, beyond the cloisters, beyond the stone walls, searched the sky for stars. There were none, only mist and the slow tolling of a bell in the city. Far beyond the monastery walls, someone still rang it. Someone still marked the dead. He closed his eyes and remembered his sister, long buried in Bruges. He remembered her laughter in summer, how she used to chase fireflies near the riverbank. He wondered if her body still lay whole beneath the church floor, or if the worms had made prayers of her bones. A door creaked behind him. A novice, thin as a shadow, stood in the archway, eyes red, fingers clutching a parchment scroll. "The abbess in St. Julian's has taken ill," he whispered. "They ask for help, for prayers, for someone to anoint the dying." Aldrich stood, though every joint screamed. He took the scroll. The ink was blurred. The names were many. He nodded. "I will go." That night, he walked through the city streets, past the shuttered inns, past the wagons piled high with the dead, past the children who no longer cried when they begged. He walked with no torch, only the wind and the soft slap of his sandals against cobblestone. St. Julian's stood silent. The door was ajar. Inside, the nuns lay on pallets, their faces pale, their gowns soaked through. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear. Aldrich moved among them like a shadow, anointing their foreheads, whispering old rites. From the ashes to the ashes. He no longer expected miracles, only mercy. Before dawn, as the sky turned iron gray, he knelt beside the abyss and closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it away with the sleeve of his robe. Outside, a cock crowed, alone, distant in the east. The first light broke through the clouds, pale, hesitant, like a hand reaching out. Aldrich sat on the chapel steps, hands folded, for the first time in weeks. He wept, not for himself, not even for the dying, but for the world that had once been clean, once whole, once full of bells that rang for joy. And as he sat there, eyes wet, the wind shifted, and in the distance, far beyond the river, far beyond the frost-covered fields, a new sound rose. It was not weeping, not screaming, but singing, low, rough, uncertain, but real. A chant carried on broken voices from a village burned nearly to the bone. A song that defied the fever, and though it wavered in the wind, Aldrich turned toward it, because even now, even here, even in the hours of sweat and smoke, the living still remembered how to pray. It began with hunger. Not the hunger of missed meals or thin winters, but something deeper, hollow, gnawing, ancient. A hunger that woke inside the bones before it ever touched the belly. It's a kind that turned shadows into meat and prayers into silence in the village of Saint Aeon. Nestled beneath the ragged skirts of the French Alps, the fields had failed for the third year in a row. First, the hail came, battering the wheat flat, shredding the bean pods, tearing the apple blossoms from their boughs like petals in a storm. Then came the floods, bloating the rivers until the bridges were swallowed. And then, worst of all, came the silence. A summer so dry, it split the earth open like cracked lips, revealing only dust where roots once lived. By the time October bled into frost, the granaries were bare. The pigs had been slaughtered months early. The goats were gone. People boiled nettles and pine bark, ground acorns into bitter cakes that bloated the belly but offered no strength. Children chewed shoe leather by the fire and learned not to ask for more. And then came the madness. A girl was found beneath the elm tree, her mouth stained red, her fingernails broken, her eyes blank. They said she had eaten her sister. They said it quietly. No one wanted to believe, but the child's bones were found in the hearth. After that, no one spoke much. The priest offered sermons to a church half empty, his voice hoarse, his hands shaking as he lifted the chalice. God tests us, he said, again and again. This is his holy fire. But it felt less like a test and more like forgetting. By midwinter, a sickness had crept into the bones of the starving. Not a fever, but something colder, a wasting. Their cheeks sank, their gums bled. Some said demons roamed the hills, whispering in the ears of the weak. Others said it was the souls of the eaten, returning to claim what was owed. One night, in the hall of the reeve, a feast was held, or so they called it. The long table had been stripped of its cloth. No meats were served, no wine poured. Only a stew, thick and gray, bubbling in a pot, brought in from the rear. No one asked what it was made of. No one dared. The scent was strange, not sweet, not spoiled, just wrong. But the hunger was stronger. They dipped their spoons in silence. The only sound was the scrape of wood against wood, and the trembling breath of the boy who served. His name was Alec. He was 14, with eyes too wide and shoulders too thin. He had once fed chickens in the churchyard, whistling to himself, dreaming of joining the watchmen when he grew tall. But now he served the stew, one ladle at a time. Eyes down, his mother had vanished 2 weeks ago that night. Anked, Lean dreamed of hands reaching from the stew pot, still steaming, bones wet and white. He woke screaming. No one comforted him. Number 1 looked at him at all. The hunger was in them now. All of them, it curled behind the eyes. It whispered of warmth, of meat, of survival. It said, just once, just enough to last. The villagers did not name the sickness that followed. They called it mire. It came slowly, like rot in a beam, until the mind sagged and splintered. People forgot their names, forgot the taste of bread. They walked barefoot in snow. They talked to trees. They howled. At night, Alling watched as his cousin burned his fingers in the fire and didn't cry. Watched a woman dig in the graveyard, searching for something she refused to name. Watched Reeve himself stand motionless in the square at dawn, eyes open, lips moving in silent litany. The world had narrowed. Even the crows had fled. One evening, Elling stood outside the chapel. Snow fell in slow spirals. He stared at the bell rope and wondered what sound would come if he pulled it now, whether it would ring or snap, whether God was still listening. Inside, the priest knelt at the altar, his robes dark with soot. He had not left the church in days. Candles ringed, him like a mote. He muttered prayers in a voice no one understood. Aling approached slowly. "Father," he whispered, "is it true?" The priest looked up, his eyes hollow. "What truth remains?" "The stew." The priest looked away. "It is better not to ask questions that tear the soul in two." Aling turned to leave, but the priest called after him. "When spring comes," he said, "plant lavender. The dead hate lavender." The boy nodded and stepped into the snow. That night, the fever came. For him, he shook beneath the straw mattress, teeth clenched, breath shallow. His aunt fed him willow bark and tied amulets to the bedposts, but nothing soothed him. He saw the girl beneath the elm, saw her hands reaching, saw the stew bubble, saw the crow watching from the lintel. When he awoke, the sun was warm for the first time in months. The snow was melting. The sky was clear. The earth smelled not of ash, but of thaw. But the village was quiet. Too quiet. He dressed slowly, his limbs light and strange, walked to the square, saw empty stalls, saw open doors. He climbed the hill, stood beneath the elm, and saw the graves, rows of them, shallow, hastily marked. The stew pot still sat beside the Reeves Hall, blackened and cracked. He did not cry, only stood there until the crows returned, circling above him. Slow and patient, Aling dug with his hands, planted lavender from the priest's old pouch. Kay watered it with the last of the snow, and sat, waiting, listening, because in Saint Hyon, the hunger had spoken, and it had not finished its tale. It was not the wind that moved through the convent at Morimond that winter. It was silence, thick and devout, heavier than snow. The old stones breathed it. The walls drank it in. It clung to the veils of the sisters like ash and filled their throats when they sang. But they did not sing much anymore. The plague had come to them late, as if God himself had tried to spare these holy women, tucked away in the Jura forest, where crows nested in pines and frost etched the windows like sacred script. The sisters had lived simply, tending their bees, drying herbs, copying prayers by candlelight. They were neither rich nor known. That had once been their safety. Now it was their tomb. Sister Genevieve was the last to remember what the bell once sounded like. It had not tolled in 60 days. The bell ringer had died first, her skin blooming black beneath her habit, her mouth full of blood. The others followed quickly. Sister Magdalene, Sister Blanche, Sister Juliet, who had once carved small wooden birds for the orphans that no longer came. Now the orphans were buried in the orchard. They had dug with spoons, with broken boards, with anything they could find. The earth was hard. Their hands bled, but no one complained. Suffering was familiar. Suffering was prayer. Only 6 sisters remained. Their days passed in ritual, not of the rule, but of survival. Scraping mold from bread, rationing the last of the goat cheese, burning rosemary at the doors, though it no longer masked the smell. Washing sheets that would be stained again by nightfall, and still they whispered their psalms. Still they lit candles for the dead. Still they watched the forest as if waiting for something to come out of it or return to it. Sister Genevieve kept a book, not a gospel, but a ledger of loss. Okay. She recorded each death with a line, each line with a name, and each name with a single word beside it. Peaceful, fevered, screaming, alone. It was not for posterity. It was for God, in case he had forgotten them. Sometimes, at night, she heard coughing from the cells. Sometimes, it was real. Sometimes, only memory. On the 31st day, without sunlight, she saw Sister Clothild standing barefoot in the cloister, head raised to the frozen sky. "There are no birds," Claude whispered. "Do you notice? Not one." "They've flown south," Genevieve said, but she wasn't sure. The bees had died. The hives stood still. The snow bore no prints. Even the mice were gone. It was as if the world had begun to forget them. Sister Clothilde, once the youngest, had stopped eating. She said food was temptation. She said they must empty themselves to be filled by the Holy Spirit. But Genevieve had seen the thinness of her wrists, had heard the weeping behind her door. They were not saints. They were afraid. The priest who had once come for Mass had long since vanished. They did not know if he had fled or perished. His chalice still sat in the vestry, covered in dust. They used it only once now to collect the water that dripped from the cracked roof, drop by drop, like blood from a wound, on the eve of Candlemas. The storm came, snow like ash-dot winds that moaned like women in labor. The roof of the refectory collapsed, burying Sister Noel beneath the timbers. They found her hands the next morning, still curled around her rosary. They did not have strength to move her. They placed a cloth over her face and sang the Magnificat with frozen lips. Later that night, Sister Clothilde approached Genevieve. "Do you believe," she asked, "that we are being punished?" Genevieve looked at her, this girl who had once danced barefoot in spring rain, who had sung to the bees as if they were kin. "No," she said gently. "I believe we are being remembered." Clothilde frowned. "I don't understand." Genevieve closed her eyes. Perhaps God remembers what he once broke. Perhaps this is his weeping. That night, the candles would not light. Not one. Not even when they pressed the flame close. Not even when they prayed. The wax remained cold. The wicks refused. It was then Genevieve knew. They were nearing the end. On the final morning, the cloister was silent. No wind, no breath, only frost, only light, at last, through the chapel windows, pale and bruised. Like the sky had finally opened one eye, Genevieve dressed with care. She braided her hair, she polished her crucifix. She opened the chapel doors and stepped inside. There, she saw them, the last of her sisters, seated in the pews as if for vespers, their heads bowed, their hands folded. Still, but the warmth was gone. Genevieve walked the length of the nave. She touched each shoulder. She wept, but quietly, always quietly. She did not sing. She only knelt and whispered the names one final time. One name for each line in the book. One line for each soul God had borrowed. When the sky turned gold, she rose. She took the chalice. She stepped into the snow and began walking down the hill into the woods to find the birds, to find the bees, to find whatever world still remembered what they had been. Behind her, the convent stood empty, silent, holy, as if it had never been touched by plague at all. And in the air, a single thread of sound, faint, barely there, like a bell rung very far away, or a voice calling her onward. There was a man in Lubeck who walked without casting a shadow, or so the children whispered, crouched behind barrels and butcher stalls, watching him pass beneath the salted arches of the fishmonger's quarter. His name was Elias. No one remembered when he had come. No one remembered where he slept. But they remembered the mask, not of leather or cloth, but of polished bronze, shaped like a saint's face, hollow-eyed and cold. He walked each morning with a long stick, tipped in black chalk, pausing at certain doors to mark a crude X upon the wood. Sometimes two, sometimes none. Always silently. Then he moved on, coat flapping like crow wings, heels echoing down alleys that reeked of brine and fear. They called him Der Boat, the messenger. No one dared ask who sent him. Behind the windows, mothers clutched fevered children to their breasts, whispering old prayers in dying dialects. The city's bells rang with no pattern. Time had unraveled at the docks. Corpses were burned by night, flames flickering across sails that would never catch wind again. Rats ruled the gutters. Bishop had fled. The surgeons drank until their knives trembled, and still Elias came. Some said he was not a man at all, that he had survived the plague once, long ago, and now walked immune. Others claimed he had been a priest who broke his vows, and this was his penance, to name the dying, door by door, forever. A few believed he was death himself, choosing who would be taken, but none dared test him. Those he marked were always gone by week's end. It was said he spoke only once to a blind beggar near the cathedral steps. The old man, dying of rot, had reached out and asked, "Have you come for me?" Elias had paused, then knelt beside him. "I come for all," he had whispered, "but not yet." The beggar wept, and by morning he was dead. No one buried him. Elias had passed by with no chalk that day in the square. Behind the shuttered guild halls, the merchants prayed to coins that had no power. They paid apothecaries for herbs and charms, crushed amethyst, wormwood, dried lizard skins. Nothing worked. Nothing stopped the coughing. The children broke out in black boils beneath their ears. Milk turned sour in the cup. Dogs howled at nothing. Dreams twisted into fever. Yet Elias never faltered. He did not run from screams. He did not flinch at blood. He stepped into hovels where others would not enter. He lifted lids from swollen eyes. He touched the foreheads of the dead. Sometimes he lit a candle. Sometimes he closed a child's fingers around a doll. Sometimes he simply stood and looked, as if memorizing the soul that had just left the room. And then he marked the door. Always the mark, always moving on, in the bishop's quarter. A young girl named Lynn waited each day at her window for the man of bronze to pass. Her mother had died 2 nights prior, her face turned to the wall, her breath rasping like wind through reeds. Her father had not spoken since. Lynn was 9. She sat with a candle and watched the street. When Elias came near, she whispered, not loudly, only enough that the flame flickered. "I am here," she said. "Don't forget me." He never looked up, not once, until the day she found a black X on her own door, painted low, where a child might reach. She ran outside barefoot, heart pounding like hooves, but the street was empty. Only snow, only silence. She turned the corner, and there he stood, Elias, still as a statue. She stopped, trembling. He said nothing, but slowly. He reached beneath his coat and pulled out something small, a bell, tiny, made of bone. He placed it in her hand, closed her fingers over it, then turned away. She called after him, voice high and breaking. "What is it for?" He did not stop. He did not answer. But that night, her father awoke and spoke her name. By morning, the X was gone, as if it had never been there. Some said Elias had powers. Others called it coincidence. Others still insisted that he merely watched death, never changed it. But Lynn kept the bell beneath her pillow, And years later, when she became a healer herself, when the next sickness came, she carried it into every house, ringing it softly before she touched the dying, not to ward off death, but to let it know they had been seen. Elias was never seen again after the snow thawed. Some claimed he walked into the sea. Some said they saw his mask nailed to the cathedral door one morning with a single black feather beneath it. Others insisted he had simply finished his task, vanished as he came. But in Lubeck, the children still play a game. They draw chalk marks on doors. They wear masks made of bronze paper. They walk silently in the alleys, touching walls, listening. And the game has only one rule. The man with no shadow never runs. He only walks. And when he stops, God, you must listen, because he has seen something you cannot yet see. And when the door is marked, you must be brave, very brave, because sometimes the ones who come for you are not cruel. They are only tired. and they carry a name that was nearly forgotten, but not quite, not yet, and in their hand is not a weapon, only a bell waiting to be heard. There was no blood, no boils, no stench of rot curling through the alleys, no blackened fingers or pus-filled lungs. In the convent of St. Aveline, disease came gently, like candle smoke, like whispers beneath veils. And because it made no noise, no one feared it at first. They called it morbid silence, the silent sickness. It began with forgetfulness. A novice named Celis left her veil in the gardens one morning. Another sister, old Morel, forgot the words to the morning psalm, her voice trembling into silence halfway through the refrain. Then, in the kitchen, Sister Anne reached for a ladle and asked, quietly, "What is this called again?" Her hand trembled as if the object were burning. By the end of that week, the abbess ordered silence throughout the convent, not for prayer, but to listen for the shifting breath of the strange new illness that moved not through skin, but through memory. Each morning, the sisters awoke not knowing who they were. One forgot the name of Christ. One forgot how to walk. It was not madness, not frenzy, only erasure, soft and slow, like frost creeping up stained glass windows. Celeste, once joyful and light-footed, sat in the chapel for hours with her eyes closed, mumbling half-words to the Virgin. Her hands were always cold. Her hair, once braided by Sister Agnes each night, now hung loose and knotted. She did not resist. She simply slipped. One day, she asked what a mother was. The word no longer meant anything, and when the priest came, sent from Rouen, cloaked in fur and incense, he could not name it either. He pressed oil to foreheads. He read from psalters, but it made no difference. The oil beaded and fell. Prayers hung in the rafters like damp linen. He left without giving a name. That frightened them more than any curse. So the sisters turned inward. They burned rosemary in the hallways. They kept written names on slips of parchment tied to each wrist, sewed crosses into their garments, over the heart. They prayed in smaller and smaller circles until even the bell of the refectory was rung no longer. The convent fell quiet, too quiet. Even the birds grew uneasy outside in the orchards. Apples rotted on the branches. Bees no longer came to the hives. The layfolk in the village stopped sending alms. They feared what they could not see, And when the fog came down from the hills, thick and low, churning the world to milk, they boarded their doors and prayed that whatever stalked the nuns would stay behind the walls of stone. But inside, the silence grew heavier. Sister Agnes began to mark the days with scratches on the chapel floor, not for time. They no longer kept time, but to remember they had once lived. When she forgot how to read, she pressed her fingers into the wax of votive candles, mouthing the letters carved on their sides. One by one, those letters vanished from her mind. Even God's name was fading. On the 50th day, the abbess collapsed, mid-prayer. Her lips were moving, but no sound came. Eyes searched the heavens, like they were asking, "Where am I?" The sisters watched, frozen, not from fear, but from the weight of not knowing whether to help, or to simply let her go. And still, the illness left no mark on the body, only on the soul. It was Celeste who did the unthinkable. Late one night, as frost thickened on the windows and the stars wheeled cold above the cloister, she crept into the library. It was forbidden after Compline, but her hands moved without hesitation. She sought parchment, ink, anything that might hold a name, and she wrote her own, Celeste, over and over. She wept as she wrote it. Her name, her only anchor, each letter a rope tied to a life she could feel slipping through her fingers. She pressed the ink into her skin. She tore a strip from her robe and tied it around her wrist, writing against list, daughter of Madeleine, sister of light. And in the hush that followed, she lit a candle. held it high. The others came, one by one, not speaking, not weeping, just watching. And then, slowly, each began to write their names, their memories, their fears. They stitched them into cloth. They carved them into the wood of pews. They murmured them in corners, again and again, so the silence would not win. The abbess, her voice nearly gone, pressed a kiss to Celis's brow. "You remembered?" she whispered. Celeste nodded. Her voice was thin, but it still came. "I remembered for all of us, when the sickness passed, for it did, though no one knew how or why. They were not the same. Some sisters never spoke again. Others carried slates around their necks with chalk to write what they could not say. Celeste became the new abbess, though she was barely 16. She kept every piece of writing from that long silence in a locked chest beneath the altar. And each year, on the day the fog returned, she opened it and read them aloud, one by one, names, words, fragments of vanished lives. So the silence would not take them again. And from that year onward, the convent changed its rule. They called it the Vigil of Words. No sister would sleep before writing her name, not out of pride, but as proof that they had lived, that they had loved, that even when no one watched, even when the sickness came with no wound, no scream, no bell, they still remained. They remembered, and that memory, however fragile, was enough to defy the darkness, enough to outlive the silence, enough to echo still in the stones. The first sound was not the scream, it was the bell. A dull, uneven clang like iron striking stone in a ruined chapel. It came from the monastery on the hill above Brienne, where wind once curled through cypress trees and sheep wandered the pastures below. Now there was no wind, no sheep, only that slow, broken tolling. In the Ashdod, it had fallen for days, gray, soft, endless, like winter without snow. It coated the earth in silence, muted the birds, choked the streams, dusted the crucifix above the chapel door until even Christ's wounds seemed buried in it. Some said it came from a fire far to the east. Others whispered darker things, that it was punishment, that it was sorrow turned solid, that it was the breath of God losing faith in the kitchen. Brother Everett set down his ladle and wept. He could no longer taste the food in the scriptorium. Parchment turned brittle, flaking like dried leaves. The monks coughed and bled from the nose. They stuffed lavender in their sleeves and muttered prayers to forgotten saints. But the ash still came, slipping beneath shutters and under doors, turning oil into mud and bread into gray dust. At night, the bell rang again. No one rang it. Brother Thomas swore he saw a figure in the tower, robed, unmoving, watching. But when he climbed the steps, heart hammering, there was nothing. Only the rope swaying slightly, only the smell of something burnt. And still, the bell dong, dong, slow, measured, as if keeping time for something long buried. The abbot, old and half-blind, ordered a fast. "This is trial," he said, hands trembling as he traced across into the ash on the chapel floor. "The Lord is watching. We must be clean." But their water turned bitter. The candles burned low. One by one, the brothers began to lose their voices, not from sickness, but as if something beneath the ash had taken them. On the seventh day, Kay buried Brother Lucien. He had walked into the fields at dusk, barefoot, singing a song no one recognized. Kay, by morning, he was found face down in a drift of ash, his fingers curled around a smooth stone. They said his lips still moved when they touched his body, whispering something only the dead could hear after that. None went beyond the walls. The monastery became a world unto itself, closed, ashen, silent. The prayers grew slower. The chants faltered. In the refectory, the walls bled soot. Rats fled the cellar. The ash crept up their robes, into their lungs, behind their eyes. They stopped washing. They stopped writing. They began burning the books, one by one, just for warmth. Even the Psalter, even the Rule, even the illuminated Gospels they had spent decades copying by hand. Brother Everett did not cry when he threw them into the hearth. His hands moved like a butcher's, precise, numb. God does not live in ink, he whispered. By now, the bell rang every hour, always the same rhythm. Dot, dong, 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 dot. Each toll slower than the last, as if something was sinking into the earth, into memory, into something beneath even that. Brother Thomas began digging in the cloister yard. No one asked why. His fingers bled. He did not stop. He said he was looking for the sound. The bell comes from below now, he muttered. Not from the tower, from beneath. They found him one morning collapsed beside the hole, his mouth filled with ash, not dead, but dreaming, his eyes wide, unseeing. His lips mouthing the bell's rhythm. Dong, dong. The abbot finally broke. He stood before the altar, once dressed in gold, now gray and crumbling, and struck it with his staff. We are not monks anymore, he cried. We are ghosts. Cloaked in ash, mouthing prayers to an empty sky. Then he tore the linen from the altar, flung it into the hearth, and walked barefoot into the bell tower. He did not return, but that night the bell changed. Not louder, not faster, just lower, as if the earth itself had swallowed it. The brothers did not speak of escape. There was nowhere to go. Brienne was gone, choked in the same ash. The woods were dead. The sky was pale. They were not waiting for death. They were waiting to forget they had ever been alive. And then, one night, the ash stopped. It did not drift. It did not settle. It simply ceased, like breath held. The silence that followed was deeper than any sound Brother ever was the first to notice. He stepped outside the chapel and looked up. The sky, for the first time in weeks, was black, and above it, stars. Not bright, not joyful, but sharp, cold, real. He fell to his knees, not to pray, not to think, just to feel the dirt beneath him. Again, the others followed. They emerged from their cells like men pulled from a tomb. They did not speak. They did not sing. They just stood, blinking, under the sky. Their robes clung to them in stiff folds. The pyre. Their beards were white with ash, but they were breathing. They were still breathing. At dawn, they entered the chapel once more. There were no psalms, no sermon. Only Brother Thomas, still pale, lighting a single candle at the altar. He turned slowly and said, "We are not dead." The bell did not ring again. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. They left the tower to rot. They boarded the door with the last of the oak, and they began to rebuild, not the walls, but the silence. They cleaned the chapel with bare hands. They rewrote the Psalter from memory. They gathered every burnt scrap and pressed it into new pages. They called it the Book of Ashes. In it, they wrote no history, only names, only prayers, only the sound of the bell, written as dong, 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 so it would not be forgotten, so it could never return. His candle would not go out. They tried 3 times. The wind blew through the ruined chapel, howling like the voice of saints turned sorrowful. And yet the flame danced, bowed low, but never died. Its wick was soaked in old wax and tears, its bowl carved from olive wood, blackened by fire. But it burned still, stubbornly, as if remembering something the world had forgotten in that small monastery outside Brienne, where the ash once swallowed voices and the bell rang for no one. the last monks gathered. Not many remained. Just a handful. Thin men with cracked lips, fingernails blackened by years of digging and writing, praying and weeping. They stood in a half circle before the altar, each bearing a page, a scrap of vellum, sit streaked and trembling their final entry in the book of ashes. It was time, not for dying, for remembering. Brother Everett stepped forward. He had lost a finger to frost and memory, but his voice still held the weight of winter. He laid his page atop the others' names. Only names: Lucia, Matteo, Thomas. Children, beggars, bakers, priests, thieves. Even the nameless had a space, especially the nameless, because in the years of plague and burning and silence, it was not empires that survived, not kings, not fortresses. It was the breath of those who remembered others. The shepherd who spoke his wife's name before dying. The orphan girl who whispered to the bones she buried. The monk who wrote the bell's sound so that it would not own him. This was the defiance, not in swords, not in sermons, but in the stubbornness of grief that chose to name love, even when love had gone quiet. Outside the chapel, morning crept through the trees like a thief, unsure of its welcome. The ash no longer fell. The fields were cracked, but green threaded through them like veins of hope. Somewhere, a bird sang high and uncertain. It was the first time any of them had heard one in years. Brother Everett smiled. He had not smiled since the first child was buried in the east garden. He turned to the others, the candle casting long shadows behind them, monastic ghosts watching themselves return to life. There will be no miracle, he said, no angel, no cure, only us, only today, and the names we carry forward. And so they did. They took the book of ashes, heavy, fragile, sacred, and sealed it in a stone box beneath the chapel floor. Not to hide it, but to root it, like a seed. So that one day, when the world forgot again, something might grow in the remembering. They left the monastery that morning, robes tucked into belts, sandals laced, sun breaking across their shoulders. Like blessing, Brother Thomas paused by the bell tower. The rope still hung, stiff with mildew and silence. He did not touch it. He only nodded. Double quotes, "We do not need to ring it," he said softly. "The world will hear us anyway." And he was right, because not long after, a child found a page drifting in the wind, because someone sank again beside a ruined well, because the fields bloomed with flowers no one planted, because somewhere candle would not go out, and neither would the story. This is not just history, it is inheritance. It is not just what they suffered, it is what they remembered. And now, it is what you carry. So when the bells fall silent in your world, when the sky turns gray and you wonder if anyone still sees you, remember Matteo, remember Lucia, remember the ash dot, and remember, even in the darkest hour of plague and flame, the light refused to die. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of their silence and the courage of their memory, then keep their light alive. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, share their story, not for views, but for remembrance, because history is not made of battles alone. It is made of witnesses. And now, that includes you.